It was a pitch-black night when I first arrived at my grandmother's village. Once lively and prosperous, the village now stood abandoned and forgotten, hidden in the shadows of a dense forest. The winds rustled the old trees, and the darkness was so thick it seemed to envelop everything like a shroud. My grandmother was the only one left living in this village after all the other inhabitants hurriedly left, abandoning their homes and belongings. The reason for this were strange legends that circulated around the village and terrifying creatures that began to emerge from the depths of the forest. The appearance of my grandmother's old cottage was gloomy and desolate. The roof was covered in moss, and the windows resembled empty eyes watching me. Grandma met me at the gate. Her eyes, once full of life, now seemed tired and sad. She hugged me tightly, but there was a sense of anxiety in her touch. "Sweetheart, I'm glad you came," she said softly. "There are things you need to know." We went inside the house, where a strange atmosphere prevailed. The air smelled of old books and candles. Grandma led me to the living room, where an old lamp barely illuminated the room. "Listen, dear, this place is dangerous," Grandma began. "Those legends you may have heard, they're not just tales. They're real." I shuddered. Despite hearing these stories, I always thought they were just bedtime stories. But the seriousness in Grandma's voice made me feel uneasy. "Many years ago, terrible creatures started appearing here," Grandma continued. "They come at night and drag people into the darkness. They are hungry, and no one knows where they came from or what they really want." Grandma told stories of people who disappeared without a trace. She spoke of nights when screams and roars were heard, and in the morning, only empty houses and signs of struggle were found. Only those who had no other choice remained in the village, but even they eventually left, leaving Grandma alone. "Why didn't you leave with them?" I asked. Grandma was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "I can't. This place has some hold over me. But now I fear that you too will be trapped." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the bed, listening to every sound outside. The branches creaked under the wind, and every rustle made me shiver. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, I heard a quiet whisper. It came from outside, near the window. I moved closer and saw dark figures moving in the distance. Their eyes glowed red, and I realized these were the creatures Grandma had mentioned. The next day, I decided to explore the surroundings. I walked through the overgrown streets and entered a few abandoned houses. Everywhere was chaos, as if people fled in haste, leaving everything they had. On the floor of one house, I found an old diary. It belonged to one of the villagers and contained notes about the last days before everyone disappeared. The entries described growing fear among the people. They saw strange shadows, heard eerie sounds, and felt something unseen following them. The last entry was especially horrifying. "Tonight we await them. We are ready to fight, but we don't know if it will help. If you find this diary, it means we lost. Flee from here while you still can." I felt chills run down my spine. Returning to Grandma's cottage, I asked her about the diary. She confirmed that the last days were the most terrifying in her life. People fought, but no one could stand against these creatures. That night, Grandma and I decided to leave the house and seek refuge in an old chapel on the edge of the village. We took only the essentials and walked through the darkness. The chapel was old but still sturdy. We locked the doors and lit candles. Grandma prayed while I sat, trembling with fear. Suddenly, someone knocked on the chapel door. We froze in horror. The knocking intensified, and the door began to crack. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would jump out of my chest. Grandma whispered prayers, and I watched as the door slowly opened. From the darkness, a figure emerged. It was a man, but his face was distorted with fear. He was covered in blood and muttered something unintelligible. Grandma quickly ran to him and began to calm him down. He said he was the only one who survived the last attack of the monsters. We spent that night together, listening to every sound. The man told us how he hid and survived among the ruins. In the morning, we decided to try to escape from the village. We knew staying here meant certain death. We left at dawn when it was still dark. Our path lay through the dense forest. We walked quickly, trying to ignore the sounds we heard around us. Suddenly, we saw them. The creatures emerged from the shadows and began to pursue us. Their red eyes glowed in the dark, and we knew they wouldn't stop until they caught us. We ran as fast as we could. The forest seemed endless, but suddenly we came out onto a clearing where an old forester's house stood. We dashed inside and locked the doors. We knew this was only a temporary shelter, but it was our only chance. The creatures surrounded the house, and we heard their roars. We knew time was against us, but suddenly it became quiet. We looked out the window and saw the monsters had disappeared. Could they have left? Grandma hugged me and said, "This is not the end, but now we have hope." This day marked the beginning of our fight for survival. We left the village and never returned.